film an episode of the popular sci-fi show The $6 Million Man. The script called for a spooky setting, so the crew set up inside the Laugh-in-the-Dark funhouse, a grimy, dimly lit attraction filled with neon skeletons and papier-mâché monsters. In the corner of one room, hanging from a noose, was a prop that the set designers thought looked particularly grotesque. A shriveled, orange-painted man with a gaping mouth. A crew member, assuming it was just a wax dummy, reached out to adjust the figure's arm, but the arm didn't bend. It snapped off. The crew member looked down in horror. Protruding from the center of the wax arm was not wire or wood, but a human bone, surrounded by dried muscle tissue. This was not a prop. It was a human body, and it had been hanging there, staring at children in the dark for years. This gruesome discovery unraveled one of the strangest tales in American history. The story of a man whose life was a pathetic failure, but whose death was a spectacular 60-year journey across the United States. This is the true story of Elmer McCurdy, the bandit who became more famous as a corpse than he ever was as a man. To understand how a human body ends up painted neon orange in a California funhouse, we have to go back to the fading days of the Wild West. Elmer McCurdy was born in 1880, drifting through a life of alcoholism and petty failure. By 1911, he decided to try his hand at being a train robber in Oklahoma. Unfortunately, Elmer was arguably the worst outlaw to ever hold a gun. He was not Butch Cassidy. He was a walking disaster. His career began with an attempt to rob a train carrying a safe containing $4,000. Elmer and his gang stopped the train, located the safe, and applied nitroglycerin to blow it open. But Elmer, who fancied himself an explosives expert, used way too much. The explosion didn't just open the safe, it obliterated it. The blast was so powerful, it melted the silver coins into the walls of the train car. The gang managed to scrape up about $450 in melted silver chunks and fled. Undeterred by his own incompetence, Elmer tried again in October 1911. He heard rumors that a Katy train was carrying $400,000 in cash intended for the Osage Nation. This was his big score. He gathered a crew and stopped the train near Okesa, Oklahoma. They boarded with guns drawn, ready for the riches. But Elmer had made a critical error. He stopped the wrong train. This was a passenger train, not the cargo train. The safe contained only $46 and 2 jugs of whiskey. A humiliated Elmer stole the whiskey and the conductor's coat, then rode off into the night, drinking his sorrows away. A posse was quickly formed to hunt him down. They tracked him to a hay shed near a ranch near the Kansas border. Elmer, hungover and desperate, engaged in a shootout with the lawman. After an hour of exchanging fire, a single bullet to the chest ended the life of the bumbling bandit. He was 31 years old. Under normal circumstances, this would be the end of the story. Elmer would be buried in a pauper's grave and forgotten. But Elmer McCurdy was destined for a different path. His body was taken to a funeral home in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. The undertaker, a man named Joseph Johnson, embalmed the body using an arsenic-based preservative, a common practice of the time which effectively mummified the corpse. Johnson waited for the next of kin to claim the body. Nobody came. Elmer had no family who wanted him. Months passed. The undertaker, realizing he had a perfectly preserved outlaw in his hands and unpaid bills to settle, decided to get creative. He dressed Elmer in a suit, placed a rifle in his hands, and stood him in the corner of the funeral home. He put a sign on the door, "The Bandit Who Wouldn't Give Up." For a nickel, visitors could come in and stare at the dead outlaw. Shockingly, it was a hit. People from all over the county paid their nickels. Elmer McCurdy was finally making money.
For 5 years, Elmer stood in that funeral home, a silent local celebrity. Then, in 1915, 2 men arrived claiming to be Elmer's long-lost brothers from California. They wept, they told stories of their childhood, and they begged the undertaker to release the body so they could give their beloved brother a proper Christian burial. The undertaker, moved by their grief, or perhaps just tired of the corpse, agreed. He handed the body over. The 2 men were not Elmer's brothers. They were James and Charles Patterson, owners of the Great Patterson Carnival shows. They didn't take Elmer to a cemetery, they took him on the road. For the next 60 years, Elmer McCurdy's corpse toured the United States as a sideshow freak. He was billed as the outlaw embalmed. He traveled with carnivals, traveling museums, and haunted houses. As the years turned into decades, the history of who he was began to fade. The arsenic hardened his skin to the consistency of leather. He shrank. He lost his ears in transport. By the 1930s and 40s, he was sold from one showman to another. He appeared in the lobby of a movie theater for the premiere of the exploitation film Narcotic. He was placed in a museum of crime in Los Angeles, near Mount Rushmore figures and wax werewolves. At some point, his new owners forgot he was real. They assumed he was just a very old, very realistic mannequin. To make him look scarier for modern audiences, someone painted his shriveled skin neon orange. He was eventually sold to the Wax Museum at the Pike in Long Beach, and when that closed, he was moved to the Laugh in the Dark funhouse. He was hung from the ceiling, swaying in the draft, while teenagers threw popcorn at him and kissed in the dark corners. He had been a dead man for longer than he had been alive. He had traveled more miles as a corpse than he ever did on a horse. When the arm snapped off in 1976 and the police were called, the Los Angeles coroner's office had a mystery on their hands. Who was this man? The initial autopsy revealed the arsenic, proving the body was very old. But the real clue came when they examined the mouth. Inside the jaw, they found a 1924 penny and a ticket stub to the Louis Sani's Museum of Crime. Using these clues and comparing the body's physical characteristics, including a gunshot wound to the chest, with old archival photographs, forensic anthropologists confirmed the impossible. The neon orange prop was the long-lost train robber Elmer McCurdy. The story became a national sensation, but this time there was a sense of dignity that had been denied to Elmer for nearly a century. Historians and citizens in Oklahoma demanded his return. In April 1977, 66 years after he was shot, Elmer McCurdy was finally brought back to Guthrie, Oklahoma. A funeral procession was held, attended by hundreds of people. He was buried in the Summit View Cemetery in the Boot Hill section, right next to another outlaw, Bill Doolin. But the authorities weren't taking any chances this time. To ensure that Elmer McCurdy would never be stolen, toured, or turned into a prop again, they didn't just bury the coffin, they poured 2 cubic yards of concrete over the casket, sealing him in the earth forever. The life of Elmer McCurdy was a tragedy of errors, a series of failures by a man looking for an easy way out. But his afterlife was an American epic, a dark, twisted, and strangely fascinating journey through the history of entertainment, from the wild frontier to the neon glare of Hollywood. He was the bad guy who literally hung around long enough to become the good guy simply by enduring the indignity of it all. As the concrete set over his grave, the wandering outlaw had finally, truly escaped the law of the carnival.